Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. We have quite a few people registered for today, close to about 500, so we are going to give everybody a couple minutes to join. So we're going to start the presentation at 3 minutes after the hour. Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us for our July webinar. Today's topic is on recreational studies in IMPLAN. From rails to trails and boating to music festivals and other events, tourism and recreation play a vital role in our economy. But how do you quantify their impact? Today, we will discuss the exciting insights you can gain when you use IMPLAN to study recreation spending of locals and non-local visitors. In this presentation, we will guide you through an economic impact analysis of Torrance Creek Greenway in Mecklenburg County, North Carolina, and take a look at the impact of a proposed expansion to the Greenway, sharing helpful tips and tricks you can apply to your own project. So introductions first. My name is Angela Slavacek. I am the manager of the Education Services team here at IMPLAN. Joining me today and presenting today's topic is another member of the Education Services team, my colleague Michael Neely. Michael is our Education Support Specialist here. Here at IMPLAN, we do like to keep our webinars interactive by allowing attendees to post questions live to our presenters. However, today's presentation will likely take close to 50 minutes, so we do ask if you have a question related to today's topic, please utilize the question box in the GoToWebinar app. The Education Services team will do our best to monitor the question box throughout the presentation. If you think you might want to ask a question, just make sure that you have your control panel open by hitting the orange arrow in the upper left portion of the pop-up window. At the conclusion of the presentation, if we do not get to answer your question within this time frame, we will personally follow up with each and every one of you to provide an answer. So with that, I will pass it off to Michael, who will get started on today's topic.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Angela, and hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Again, I am Michael Neely, our resident education support specialist here on the IMPLAN Education Services team. And today I'm going to be leading you through our presentation. So I'll begin first with a high-level introduction to tourism or tourist and recreational spending impacts in IMPLAN. Then I'll be diving into some survey as well as survey data considerations that you can keep in mind for your impact analyses before lastly walking through that aforementioned example of a recreational study or project you may find yourself using in IMPLAN. So with that, we'll start here first with tourism. So tourism is defined as a composite of activities, services, and or industries that deliver a travel experience to individuals and groups traveling from their homes for recreational, leisure, or business purposes. Business Businesses and public organizations are increasingly interested in the economic impacts of tourism at a national, state, and local level, as I'm sure you are all aware of as you've joined us for our webinar here today. So one may regularly hear claims that tourism supports X number of jobs in an area, or that a festival or special event generated an X million dollars in sales or income to a local community. Again, tourism studies are going to imply that people are traveling some distance away from their local area or from their home. Tourism's economic benefits give the industry greater respect among the business community, as well as public officials and the public in general. This often is going to translate into decisions or public policies that are going to be favorable to tourism, as community support is important for tourism, as this tourism activity is typically an activity that affects the entire community. Tourism businesses depend extensively on each other as well as on other businesses, government, and residents of the local community to thrive. The economic benefits and cost of tourism reach virtually everyone in the region in one shape or form or another. Economic impact analyses are going to provide tangible estimates of these economic interdependencies and a better understanding of the role and importance of tourism in a regional economy. Examples of tourism studies that we typically see come across our plate in IMPLAN include, but of course are not limited to, college and university visitor spending studies, as well as music festival impact studies, just for a couple of examples. Now, recreation, on the other hand, is going to be defined as the activities undertaken during this said leisure time, also known as a sort of amusement or activity a person takes part in for pleasure or relaxation. It's often going to be difficult to distinguish between tourism and recreation studies, as they are basically interrelated. Tourism implies traveling a distance away from home, while recreation is defined as the activities undertaken during leisure. Again, recreation is a sort of amusement or an activity a person takes part in for pleasure or relaxation rather than as a part of their workday. Recreational areas are public areas used for sports and games. Outdoor recreation is even more closely related to tourism at that. The overlap is partly going to be dependent upon the length of time of the recreational activity. For your recreational studies, we typically say that you should consider using an IIA or an ICA, excuse me, in contribution analysis event type if you're trying to estimate the economic impact of an existing recreational activity or a natural area in your region, as opposed to a new recreational activity or area in your region. And IMPLAN industries do exist to model various recreational activities. For example, we have Industry 504, other amusement and recreation, but make sure not to double count any visitor spending with these types of industry operations, as in the case of 504, as well as all the other various recreational industries, visitor spending will be included within that industry's output. So you would be double counting if you were to run them separately. For examples of recreational studies, we could be looking at a rails to trails study or a recreational boating, which could in particular be difficult to distinguish from tourism or a tourist study. Think about how recreational boating is both a recreational activity as well as a tourist activity, but which one we classify that under, recreational versus tourism, is going to depend on the duration and location of the trip. A boater who uses his or her boat for a day would be considered to be participating in a recreational activity. They could be at the local lake or a local pond. While on the other hand, a boater who takes a longer trip could be considered a tourist, say if they took their boat down to the coast instead of staying local. Here we have a few considerations for working with tourism and recreational analyses in general. The first, of course, is going to be the study region, as with any impact analysis in IMPLAN. An economic impact analysis always requires the definition of a study region. The survey that you use for your data or any of your data related to tourism or recreation should only measure spending that takes place within your study region that you have defined. Separating out spending within a local region is particularly important if visitors are going to be on extended trips stopping in various places. Only the portion of that trip spending that occurs within the given study region is going to generate local economic impacts and thus can be modeled within that study region. The region could be defined by a map, so as a centralized location, or as a given radius from a destination. In some situations, you may even want to separate spending at the particular sites, be it a hotel, marina, or a state park, separated from spending offsite within the surrounding region. Regional economic models generally do not get any smaller than a single county, as any data below the county level is limited. Although we do have zip code level data in IMPLAN, we typically recommend to not go much smaller than a single county. We also need to define, again, a tourist versus a visitor, because these two types of spending, or two types of people, are likely to spend money in pretty different ways. Segmenting by tourist type is going to be very important because we need to know exactly what to count as new money to the region. We also need to determine the type of spending that's important to model. So if we're looking at just goods and service purchases, or are we also looking at their associated government spending or infrastructure investments associated with this recreational or tourist activity? And this is important to distinguish because, of course, we would model them very differently in IMPLAN. So we need to be very careful here not to double count spending by tourists, again, with operations for the industries they spend money at. Also, we should consider retail margins that could be applicable given tourist spending at such retail establishments, as well as the local purchasing percentages associated with those commodity purchases. And lastly, the data collection methods and assumptions are also huge for tourism studies. We're going to need to carefully define spending as either a new impact to the region or contribution of some existing activity, making sure that we use reliable data sources to construct our project. So very simply put, a study of tourism spending looks at how visitors spend money in a local economy. There are a few key data points required for these types of studies. The first is going to be your visitation. Since total spending is usually estimated by multiplying an average spending figure per visitor times the number of visitors, it's going to be impossible to estimate a change in total spending without first coming up with or estimating some number of visitors that are going to be affected by this given action, whether that be a tourism activity or a recreational activity. It is also important that the units for which use is available are compatible with the units of analysis for which spending is estimated in order to properly multiply the two figures. One often must include a few key questions in addition to spending questions to convert these units for use in spending when it pertains to survey data. Party size and length of stay information are the most common variables for converting spending to a per person, per party, per trip, or per night basis. Then we have to also consider our data sources. We're either typically, when we're talking about tourism or recreational studies, we're either given data on tourism spending or must survey visitors to obtain a breakdown of their spending, or possibly even forced to find some public data to utilize, perhaps to the local or state tourism board for our analysis. So those are a few considerations for preparing your data in IMPLAN. And now we will move on to some more information specific to setting up a survey analysis and using said survey data in IMPLAN more generally speaking. So solid survey design and collection ensure that it's going to be easy to convert our values into events in IMPLAN. Remember that in IMPLAN, you can always mix and match multiple event types. So we could use industry output events with commodity output events, as well as use custom or NAICS industry aggregation schemes. And we'll touch more on that later, but we will be using a custom industry aggregation scheme for our Torrance Creek Greenway analysis later on in the presentation. You can also use the NAICS to IMPLAN bridge or search for industry selection by spending category, because it is pretty common that people have more detailed spending categories than what is available in IMPLAN, and then they need to bridge these spending categories into IMPLAN industries, and the NAICS to IMPLAN bridge, as well as the NAICS to IMPLAN sector search within our industry events, is going to be particularly helpful for that. We also talked about how typically, especially when it pertains to survey data, you're going to have an average spending figure as opposed to a total spending figure. You can utilize the event scale or group scaling option to account for the number of visitors per spending category. And again, that may seem a little bit ambiguous now, but we will show you how that works a little bit later on. And again, as long as you are not using one of those custom or NAICS industry aggregation schemes, you can also utilize the IMPLAN event template to upload a long list of events. So here we have a few general considerations for whenever you find yourself setting up a survey or designing a survey. The first is going to be survey fatigue. Nobody likes to take a long survey. You're voluntarily giving some data to somebody. You want to try to keep that survey as short as possible, as well as avoiding complex questions or technical jargon that may confuse people and that can spoil your data because you're just getting bad answers because they don't really understand the question. Also, make sure to keep a logical flow of these questions so that one question can build off the other. It's also important to avoid survey bias. So do not gather personal information from people, as well as try to limiting open-ended questions, And then lastly, for avoiding bias, we want to identify appropriate sampling methods to gather our survey data. For survey design, it's also important to have quantitative as well as qualitative questions. So we must have some quantifiable responses for economic impact analyses, just so that we can bring that data into IMPLAN and run the project. But it's also going to be super important to have qualitative responses in order to segment the survey population by visitor type. So just some things to keep in mind if you find yourself designing a survey to gather some survey data. And this is an example of a simple sample survey with some general questions that you may find in a typical tourism or recreational studies survey. So the first is, where did you stay? So not just a yes or no, but also giving multiple options with the ability to quantifying their purchasing for each. So you could, it's possible that they stayed in a hotel. How much they spent on the hotel? It's also popular nowadays to stay in an Airbnb, for example. How much did you spend on your rental house? Then the second question is on transportation. So how did you get to and from Charlotte? Did you utilize a plane? If so, how much did your plane ticket cost? Or did you use some other form of transportation, such as the train or driving? Then the next is about transportation when you are visiting your tourism destination. Did you use the same car that you utilized to get to your destination? If not, did you rent a car locally? If so, how much did it cost? And it's also very typical, especially in tourism cities, that people don't rent cars because they have reliable transit services such as public transportation, Uber, etc. And again, a cost component. So qualitative as well as quantitative aspects to these questions. And then you have some more general or specific questions, such as how much did you spend locally on gas, food and beverage, recreation, and retail? Again, notice that also all of these questions have a local component, so we can specifically dive into what exactly and how much exactly this spending occurred on a local basis, because we have to define the spending to a particular region. And so here we have a list of some survey data collection considerations for, again, collecting this survey data. First, we'll need to assess the feasibility of collection, so the mode of collection as well as the limitations such as cost, time, the culture of the respondees, etc. While it would be better to have a wider sample of people, that is not going to be void of literal time cost, as well as just being able to make sure we're segmenting the correct people for our particular analysis. But with that, you also need to be careful to avoid bias, which we talked about briefly earlier in the survey design. But that's also important in the data collection. So identifying appropriate sampling methods. Typically, you may find 5 types of sampling methods, such as random, systematic, convenience, cluster, or stratified sampling methods that we won't dive too much into here, but just something to keep in mind. It's also important to consider the researcher and respondent interaction, making sure that we treat all respondents the same in our interactions with the same format of surveying, because if not, that can certainly impact the types of answers that we are given and could potentially spoil the validity of the data we have collected. And lastly, the time of collection is always going to be a factor, such as the time of the day. People are going to be probably less likely in the morning to want to respond to you because they're just waking up. So you're going to get different types of responses in the morning versus the afternoon, etc. Such as same as the time of the week. You can imagine people may be more elated towards the end of the week as the work week grinds to a close. So that could certainly affect the types of answers that we gather, as well as the season and the weather could all be factors here. So you just always want to keep those in mind for your data collection whenever setting up a survey. It's often the case that getting close to a 100% response rate for the total population that we're trying to measure spending for is not going to be possible. And when getting close to a 100% response rate for a survey is not possible, the total spending from these survey respondees cannot be used because we don't know exactly how much was spent. We just know how much was spent by the people that responded to the survey, but we know that that's not going to be 100% representative of the population we're trying to measure. So instead, we can rather use the responses to calculate an average spending in order to be representative of that total population. So the average spending would, by category, would be equal to the total spend from all of our respondents, of course, divided by the number of respondents. And then we could use that average spending by category to get a projected total spend by category by multiplying that average spending figure from our survey by our known expected number of visitors. So with that, we're now all prepared and ready to jump in for our use case example today. And for this example or use case, we are going to be looking at a proposed expansion for the Torrance Creek Greenway. The Torrance Creek Greenway, or the TCG, is a 1.8-mile paved greenway and boardwalk section of the Carolina Thread Trail located in Huntersville, North Carolina, which is in Mecklenburg County. This Torrance Creek Greenway winds through local woods and behind local residential neighborhoods and is one of the many trails maintained by Mecklenburg County. The Mecklenburg County Parks and Recreation Department is proposing an expansion that would add an additional 2 miles to the Torrance Creek Greenway. The department wants to measure the economic impact of this expansion itself, in addition to the new visitor spending at local businesses that we can associate with the Greenway's improvements. So here's what we know about the expansion. So this TCG expansion will begin in 2022 and will be completed alongside renovations to the existing 1.8-mile trail. So this is not going to be your typical maintenance or repair. This is also going to be improvements. So they're going to be jazzing it up a little bit, maybe replacing some old boardwalks or something like that. So we've got some trail construction costs that are going to be estimated to be $200,000 per mile, and the renovation costs are estimated to be $10,000 per mile. And we've derived this data from data reported on other like systems within this region. The Mecklenburg County Parks and Recreational Department estimates the annual number of daily visitors from the local area, so within Mecklenburg County, to increase by 75,000 as a direct result of this expansion. And with that, also the number of visitors from outside of the county to increase by about 5,000 per year. The Parks and Recs Department conducted a survey of the Torrance Creek Greenway visitors to gain a better understanding of how these two visitor segments, so local versus non-local, spend money related to this recreation activity at businesses located close to or in the general vicinity of the Torrance Creek Greenway. And the results of the survey are in front of us right now, and they're going to allow us to classify spending into 3 different categories. So we have gas spending, food and beverage stores, as well as restaurant spending. Again, these are all businesses located close to or in the general proximity of the Torrance Creek Greenway that visitors spent money at before or after their Greenway visit. So we can directly attribute the spending, to their Greenway visit. We can see here that locals didn't have any additional gasoline purchases on average, because the majority of these local visitors are going to not spend any additional gas money that they wouldn't have already spent within the county to visit this particular greenway. But they did spend roughly $3.50 on food and beverages at their local food and beverage retail stores on things such as water bottles, Gatorades, granola bars, and various snacks, etc., as well as a $10 average per person at their local restaurants, local to the TCG, of course. And from the non-local visitors, we can see that they spend about $15 on average coming from various other regions to this new expanded greenway, again, on retail gasoline. Again, this is going to be from putting locally sold gas in their cars within Mecklenburg County, directly attributable to when they visit the greenway. We can also see that they spent over twice as much on food and beverage retailers with an average of $7.50 per head. And that's similar to the restaurant spending that was about $25 per person on average to get food before their journey back to their residences. So of course, we can take these spending categories and per person values and translate these into individual events in IMPLAN that would look a little bit something like this. So we can see up here at the top that locals are going to have two different spending categories that we're going to quantify through our events, one for food and beverage spending, which will be an industry output event in industry 406, and one for the restaurant spending across the three restaurant industries or 509 through 511. For the non-local spending, they will have both of those two spending categories, so food and beverages and restaurants, and we'll set them up the same way as industry output events through industries 406, and then for restaurants 509 through 511. But non-locals are also going to have a third event for the retail purchases of gasoline, which we will model again as an industry output event through industry 408. And as you can see on this rightmost column are event values. So for our event values here, we're going to use the average spending per person for each of the categories. And then we're going to utilize the scaling feature in IMPLAN to account for the amount of visitors by type. But again, I will show you more on that a little bit later. And remember also that in addition to the visitor spending, we will also have to model our two known construction values. For the new construction, we're going to model that through industry 56, construction of other new non-residential structures, with an event value of $400,000 to reflect the 2-mile expansion at a cost of $200K per mile. And then we will also have a second construction event for the renovations to be completed alongside the expansion through industry 60, which is maintenance and repair of other non-residential structures, with an event value of $18,000. That again is going to reflect the 10K per mile renovation cost by the existing 1.8 mile Greenway. And you may have noticed here again that for our restaurant spending, we have 3 different industries with a single event value. And so these spending categories are going to be specified into more than one IMPLAN industry. So to account for this, we could either parse spending out industry by industry, or we could utilize industry aggregation because we don't have any additional information on what exactly or what type of restaurant exactly they spent this money on average at. Would probably just lean towards industry aggregation here. So for those of you that are not familiar, I'll go through a quick background on that. Industry aggregation is an IMPLAN functionality that allows you to combine industries together. You can create your own aggregation schemes, or you can utilize pre-built industry aggregation schemes based on the NAICS 2 and 3-digit codes. Again, you can also create your own aggregation schemes. For example, if you want to examine all restaurant industries combined together, we could combine all 3 industries 509 through 511 into a single industry, which is what we will do for this project. And again, a little bit more on those pre-built industry aggregation schemes that we have available for you. Those are based on the North American Industry Classification System codes, so NAICS codes, by either the 2-digit or 3-digit level of detail. But also just remember that whenever you're using aggregated industries or aggregated regions, you're gonna have a little bit of a loss of detail that would be evident if you were not to aggregate those industries or region, and this is known as aggregation bias, which we will see, of course, in our example today. With aggregated schemes, you can model industry events, commodity events, labor income, household income, industry contribution analysis events, but spending pattern events, as well as the industry impact analysis or IIA events are not enabled using these aggregation schemes outside of the default IMPLAN 546. So just keep that in mind whenever considering aggregation schemes. To access aggregation schemes available for your project, you select your preferences or avatar drop down in the top right and then select the Preferences button here, which would bring us to our default preferences screen. If you click the Industry Aggregation tab on the left, you'll have this search bar as well as a few various options. And from this search bar, we can look at the various schemes available. You see here the top option is that 536 unaggregated scheme, which is the old IMPLAN Industry scheme, of course, that we use from 2013 to 2017. It's here if you need it, but generally we can ignore this. And again, you can also see that we have that IMPLAN 2-digit NAICS and IMPLAN 3-digit NAICS based on the 536 as well as the current 546. In addition to those, you'll see such as this furniture combined aggregation, any of the custom aggregation schemes that you have previously built out. Clicking on these will allow you to show what IMPLAN industries are included in each of the NAICS designations. For example, if you were looking at the 2-digit NAICS scheme, and you click the caret icon right here to see which IMPLAN 546 industries are included. So for example, here we have our new 2-digit NAICS code 1, which is agriculture, forestry, fishing, and hunting. And this little 19 right here lets us know that there are 19 industries from the default aggregation scheme included in this new aggregated single industry. So back to that preferences page, you're also able to hit new custom scheme here to create your own groupings of industries. So based on the survey results that we got, and how we intend to model our average spending for our visitors, we can combine those restaurant industries together to make our analysis more simple, because we don't want to have to break that restaurant spending out across those 3 restaurant industries. And this is what that would look like. We would build, click new custom scheme, and on the right, we would hit this button right here, hit add new industry, which we would name restaurants. And from the left, we would grab industries 509 through 511 to run our restaurant spending through. So, and again, this is the custom aggregation scheme that we'll use for this project today. So IMPLAN, when you select create aggregation scheme or complete aggregation scheme, that is, excuse me, IMPLAN will take a few moments to build this all out. You can then search for the title, select it, and give your project a name after it has been completed. Note that all unaggregated industries will remain as single industries under our new custom aggregation scheme. So next, you'll just have to select your region, and note that the region details icon in this case would show up as yellow because you have not built out your new custom aggregation scheme to that region. So you will have to click the yellow icon next to the region's name to allow IMPLAN to build the underlying model in that new aggregation scheme. So now we're ready to jump into IMPLAN and start setting this project up. We will start first from our project screen. So we'll come to projects here and select new project in the top right. We'll name our project Recreational Study Torrance Creek Greenway Expansion. Then you can see here we have the option to select our various aggregation schemes. I named our custom aggregation scheme our aggregated restaurant scheme. So we'll go ahead and select that and now choose to create our project, which will bring us to the region screen. So say, for example, we wanted to build out the state of Virginia, which of course we don't. If you click on that, you see our region details icon is yellow because it hasn't been built. If we wanted to build out this region, we could simply click on that. In the name of saving some time, I went ahead and built out Mecklenburg County for us. So when it is finished building, that region details icon will revert back to our black squid here. So once we have selected our region, we can go ahead and create our impact, which of course will bring us to the IMPLAN impact screen, where we can start adding our events. So remember that we have 5 total visitor spending events across our 2 different visitor categories to reflect the new visitors due to the expansion of the Torrance Creek Greenway. So we'll start, of course, with those events. The first will be for retail gasoline, which of course is only for non-locals. So we will title that non-locals gasoline, which will be an industry output event in Industry 409, retail gasoline stores with an event value of $15. Next, we'll go ahead and add our first local spending category, which is going to be local food and beverages, which is an industry output event in our retail food and beverage store industry with an event value of $3.50 to reflect the average spending for this visitor type. Because we also have spending by non-locals in this category, we'll just go ahead and duplicate this event and change a few things. So we'll change it from locals to non-local, and we'll change the event value to the average spending in this category, which was $7.50. Then we have the local spending on restaurants, which also is an industry output event, and our new aggregated industry 1, which is restaurants. And for our locals, their average spending was $10, but for our non-locals, the average spending, remember, was $25. So just change those things after duplicating. And our last 2 events are going to be those 2 construction events, the first of which we will title TCG Expansion, which again is another industry output event in our now Industry 57, construction of new non-residential structures. This in the default IMPLAN 546, this is actually Industry 56, but updated in our new custom aggregation scheme, it is Industry 57. And our event value here was that $400,000 in construction costs. Then we have the TCG renovations, which also is an industry output event in what is now Industry 61, maintenance and repair of non-residential structures. And our event value there was just $18K. Okay, so the last couple of things we need to do are going to be to duplicate our groups so that we can utilize group scaling, which is, again, a feature that allows us to multiply our event values by the number of visitors per visitor type. So all we need to do here is hit our group options, and we will duplicate this Mecklenburg County group twice. We'll name our top group locals, where we will drop our local spending events, and our second group non-locals, and our final group we will name Connex for construction. So to utilize scaling, we could just simply click this little 1 up here. Again, by default, the group scaling will be just 1. So a 1-to-1 transformation from your event values to what is run through the model. But for our example, we know that this is expansion is going to bring in 75K additional local visitors. So we'll multiply our event values by 75,000 for our local group. And for our non-local group, we'll multiply it by the 5,000 new non-local visitors. Construction, we do not need to scale, so we'll just leave that value as 1. So we'll go ahead and grab our non-locals first by clicking our little handles here. We can drag and drop them together into our non-local group. And we'll do the same for our local spending into our local group and our construction spending into our construction group. As you can see here, there is a scaling option next to each event. So if we only had a couple of different events to scale, or if each of our events had a unique value that we needed to scale by, we could hit, again, our group options and toggle, do not duplicate. We could toggle event scaling, which would give us the ability to change these scaling factors from 1 to whichever factor we needed. But of course, for our example, it just would be more simple to utilize group scaling instead. So now we can go ahead and press run, and our project will begin to populate results. So heading back to our slides here, while that's running, I went ahead and pulled some generic versions of our results for us, just to save a little bit of lag in this process, starting with the total results. So this is going to be what we would see by default in 2022 dollars with no filters applied. Again, we could see a total employment impact of 19 employees with an associated labor income of over 950K, as well as our total output of $2.3 million. And again, this is all going to be stemming from that initial investment by Mecklenburg County of about $418,000. So 418K results in a total output of 2.3 million. And here we have the total visitor spending results. So the total value of all of visitor spending was just slightly over $991,000. And this is going to be where the majority of our total impacts here, as you can see, the total output of 2.3 million, majority of this comes directly from our visitor spending associated with the Greenway expansion. So again, we'd have total employment from the visitors impacts of 15 with an associated labor income of over $670,000. And then lastly, we have, of course, the construction results. So we see that direct initial investment of our $418,000 with an associated total output of just under $666,000, which is good for a type SAM multiplier of over 1.5 for our construction investment alone. So we'll come back here, see our project is done running. And we see the same thing. So our total unfiltered results are $2.37 million in total output, but we could, of course, filter out by group. So say we want to just view construction, we could filter by the Connex group and then update our results with our little blue spinning wheel in the top right. And see our results for our 2 construction events. Again, roughly $666,000 of output with just under 4 employees, and total tax results, impact results, that is, of over $66,000. We could also come to our more detailed results, such as our output tab here. Say we want to remove our group filter to see our total results across all industries. This industries by impact table is particularly useful to parse out your output results by your various industries. Again, here we can see that what I spoke about earlier, that aggregation bias that is evident. We don't have more detailed results than our aggregated industry. So once you set an aggregation scheme for your project, it will follow you from the region screen to your impacts through your results. There's no way to disaggregate this industry after running your project with this industry aggregated. Again, this was our 3 restaurant industries aggregated into a single industry. And we can see that that also reflected a sizable portion of our $2.3 million in output. The total output, of course, accounting for over $900,000. We could also come to our environmental results to get the associated environmental impact from our expansion. And again, these are going to be linear environmental results. So being that we increased output across these industries, we will see an increase in environmental emissions. So with our project, we see an associated greenhouse gas emission of 320,000 kilograms, again, of greenhouse gases. And this is going to be associated with, let's say, 60,000 meters cubed of water use. So just something to consider whenever running these analyses is that while it also has positive impacts, it will have an associated increase in emissions. So with that, I will go ahead and pass the mic back off to Angela, and she can get us brought home for the duration of this presentation. Angela?
All right, thank you so much, Michael. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Again, we'll reiterate that if you do have a question, make sure you get them into the question box. We have been answering them throughout the presentation, and we do have a number left to go. Again, if we do not get to answer them live here, make sure that you guys are aware we will be following up with each and every one of you to get you a response. As always, we are always interested in finding new topics to talk about. So we want to hear what you would like us to present on. If you have any suggestions, reach out to support@implan.com with your feedback. And also, if you ever want to dig a little deeper into the new application, you can schedule a live personal demo by visiting implan.com/demo. On the demo, our team can show you all of the data inside the application, run through an analysis specific to your interest, and also show you all of the results that are populated by IMPLAN. To schedule yours, please visit that link right there. And of course, you can always email our customer success team at support@implan.com with a specific question. We have our 5 CSMs. If you are a current subscription, if you have a current subscription, excuse me, you can email your support manager directly, or you can just send it into the IMPLAN support site. Additionally, we have a community forum, which is also located on our support site. There you can post a question directly into one of the topics that are listed. If a community member would like to, they can respond directly to the question, or one of us from the Education Services team will provide you an answer as well. So just another way that you can reach out if you have any questions. We get this each time that we present a webinar, and just want to verify that everybody knows we do store all of the recordings for our previous webinars on our support site. You can find them in the lower half quadrant of the support site under IMPLAN products. If you go into there, there is a Link and Learn series where all of our previous webinars and this webinar will be posted. If you attend the webinar, you will be provided a follow-up email from our marketing team with a link directly to the recording. Also, that community section, which I mentioned in the previous slide, is located on the far right there under the community section. So with that, we thank you all for attending today. We've had a number of questions come in, and we do have a little bit of time left to answer just a couple of them. So the last one that I have not answered came from Mary. She asked, can you just multiply the value by the amount of people and add the value in the value section instead of changing the scaling number? And yes, of course, that is always going to be an option, Mary. Scaling is just one of those nice features that we've added to the application that allow you to scale by event or by the total group itself. So by doing so, it makes it a little bit easier if your numbers change throughout the process. For example, if your visitations numbers increased, you don't have to go through and redo the entire event. You can just redo that one number, and vice versa if the dollar value changes. If you've rerun your analysis, as opposed to spending $750, it's now $850, you can just change that one number. So it just makes it a little bit easier that you don't have to do the calculations outside of IMPLAN. You can do them right there in the screen. So again, it's just an option. You can do either or. But just remember that if you do scale the group as opposed to the individual event, it will multiply the effects of each event that is in that group. And I do want to go back to a question. Michael, if you have a moment, can you open up your IMPLAN screen?
Sure thing.
Okay, if you go back into your impacts page, there was a question about the retail margins, which is something that you mentioned in the beginning when you're dealing with retail or wholesale sectors. And the question was he supposed to set the margins? And the answer is yes, of course, we wanted to set the margins. So if you click on that retail gasoline stores, you'll see that the default option, and even for the retail food and beverage, the default option is always going to be set to that purchaser price. If you want to make edits, you can just click on that unedit. Yep, or unlock, excuse me, to edit it. So the default is going to be set to that purchaser price, which is going to apply that margins. In this case, using the 2019 data set, that margin is 21.97%. One of the cool features that we've just recently added into IMPLAN is that you can actually change that value now. So if instead you want, or you know that your gasoline station is actually keeping less money, or they're bringing in more money, you can change that value from that 20.97% to something like 30%. And that's going to change the value of the dollars that is being kept locally for the operations of that gasoline store. It looks a little different when you are editing margins for a commodity, but these are the edit margin features that we have on these industry events. So yep, so by default, again, purchaser price is going to be set. If you want to switch it to producer price, you can just click on that radio button to select producer price instead. Okay, we got 2 minutes left. There is the question from Rex saying, why did the detailed export files not agree with the summary result unless stated in the current dollar years? Yes, that is a great question, Rex. So if you go to the results screen, Michael, we do have a download button on the navigation bar. From there, you have the option of downloading some summary results or some detailed results. The summary results are going to be downloaded in the default dollar year that you have set as a user. So you have an option and your user preferences to change your default dollar year from the current year, which is 2022, to any other year between, I think, 1980s into 2060. So whatever year you have set as your default, that is what it will download as for the summary results. However, the detailed taxes and the detailed economic indicator results are going to download in the data year that you have used for that project. So in this case, we use data year 2019. That means that the detailed results are going to be in the 2019 dollar years. So it is a little confusing. That is something that we're working on changing for the future, but currently that is how it exists in the platform. But great question. And I will point out that none of the filters actually apply to the download results feature. So if you are interested in changing any of the results specific to your project, you can actually go into the summary tab, or the overview tab, sorry, and go under summary. And you have the option of actually looking at the impacts by economic indicators or by taxes. So if you click on the economic indicators one, Michael, Currently, what you can do here is you can set filters, and then you can download the table or copy and paste over the table from the results. So if you just go ahead and change the impact filter to direct, you will see that the table does update, and then you can download it from there, or like I said, copy and paste it over. So that is one way to apply the filters to your export results if you wish to do so. But again, great questions. We unfortunately did not get to answer all of them in the time that we had allotted, but we will get back to each and every one of you. We hope you enjoyed the presentation today, and thank you so much for joining. As we said, please let us know if there are any topics of interest to you that we can present on the upcoming webinars. And thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you, Angela, and thank you everybody for joining us.
Have a great day.